So, about that time on October 23rd, deep on the Appalachian Trail, let's just say the only thing more unsettling than the crushing silence was the way the leaves began to rustle my name in a whisper so crisp it felt like someone was right behind me. So this happened last fall when I drove up to the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire, to a specific trailhead off the Concamagas Highway for a place called Lincoln Woods Trail. It was October 23rd, a Saturday, and I remember pulling into the gravel parking lot right around 2:30 in the afternoon. The sun was already starting to dip behind the massive peaks, casting these long, deep shadows that made the autumn colors look almost vibrant, like a saturated photo, the kind that feels a little off, a little too perfect. I had my old Ford Ranger packed with a 3-season tent, a sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees, and enough dehydrated meals to last me 3 nights. I'd been planning this solo trip for weeks, a chance to really disconnect, no cell service, no emails. Just me and the trail and the crisp New England air. The lot was maybe half full, a few Subarus with kayak racks, a beat-up Jeep, the usual outdoorsy crowd. I remember feeling that familiar buzz of anticipation as I laced up my boots, the smell of pine needles and damp earth filling the truck. Cab as I opened the door, the air was cold, a sharp bite to it that promised to frost overnight. But I was prepared. I'd done this 100 times before, or at least it felt that way. I shouldered my pack, clicked the lock on the truck, and took that first satisfying step onto the trail. The wide path leading away from the highway sounds and into the silence of the woods. The Lincoln Woods Trail is an old railroad bed, so it's wide and flat, following the Pimicwasit River, and for the first hour or so everything was perfect. Textbook, exactly what I needed. The river was a constant, rushing companion on my left. The water icy and clear, tumbling over rocks worn smooth by centuries. The trees were a blazing canopy of red and orange and gold, and the only sounds were my boots crunching on the gravel, the wind sighing through the high branches, and that constant, soothing white noise of the river. I passed a few groups coming the other way, a couple with a happy, panting dog, a family with kids who looked bored, all of them offering the same hiker's nod, the silent "how's it going" we all do out there. I remember checking my watch at 3:45, making a mental note that I wanted to get to the Black Pond Bushwhack turnoff before full dark, which gave me plenty of time. I was making good pace, feeling strong, the pack sitting comfortably on my shoulders. That's when I first noticed the silence. It wasn't an immediate thing. Like a slow draining of sound, I realized I hadn't heard a bird call in a while. No squirrels chattering, nothing, just the wind and the river, which suddenly seemed quieter too. Like the river had narrowed or something. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe a hawk had flown overhead, scattering the smaller birds. It happens. But the feeling lingered, a tiny, cold seed of unease in my gut. I kept walking, trying to shake it off by focusing on the rhythm of my steps, the weight of my pack, the way my breath blown in the cooling air. The shadows were getting longer, stretching across the trail like grasping fingers, and the colors of the leaves seemed to deepen, shifting from bright fire to a dull, bloody crimson. Up ahead, the trail made a gentle curve around a large granite outcrop. As I rounded the bend, I saw a man standing alone in the middle of the path. Just standing there facing me, he was maybe 50 yards away, too far to make out details. But I could see he was tall and thin, wearing dark clothing, no pack that I could see. Which was weird because you don't just hang out on a trail like this without gear. Not this time of year, not this time of day. I gave a casual wave, the universal hiker hello, but he didn't wave back. He just stood there, perfectly still. I slowed my pace a little, the unease in my stomach tightening into a knot as I got closer. I could see he was older with a gaunt, weathered face, and he was dressed in what looked like old-fashioned wool trousers and a dark jacket. Stuff you might see in a museum, like a locker from 100 years ago. His hands were hanging at his sides, and his eyes, they were fixed on me, but they didn't seem to focus. They were pale, almost milky, and he didn't blink. Afternoon, I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet woods. He didn't respond, didn't move a muscle. I was maybe 20 feet from him now, and I could see the texture of his wool coat, the way it was frayed at the cuffs. I could see the stubble on his chin, the deep lines around his mouth, and I could feel those pale eyes on me, looking through me. I moved to the far side of the wide trail to give him a wide berth, my heart starting to thump a little harder in my chest. As I passed him, I caught a smell, a faint, dry odor like old paper and dust, like a room that's been shut up for decades. I didn't look back, just kept walking, my ears straining for any sound behind me, but there was nothing. A crunch of gravel, no rustle of clothing. After a minute, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to look. I stopped and turned around. The trail behind me was empty, completely empty, just a straight, tree-lined path fading into the shadows. The man was gone, vanished. There was nowhere he could have gone that fast. The woods on either side were thick, impenetrable, a wall of spruce and birch. He couldn't have just disappeared. A cold dread washed over me, a feeling so profound it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I stood there for a full minute, maybe two, just staring at that empty stretch of trail, listening to the absolute silence. The river had gone quiet too. The wind had died. The world held its breath. And then from the woods to my right, so close it could have been right next to my ear, I heard a whisper, a dry, rasping sound like pages turning. It said one word, clear as day, my name. I stared at those words, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The leaves weren't being blown by the wind. They were moving with a terrible, deliberate purpose. Each one vibrating like a frightened animal, holding its place in the sentence. You shouldn't have stopped. The message was clear. Direct response to my decision to make camp. A confirmation of my deepest fear. This was a trap, and I had walked right into it. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My stomach churned. I looked back up towards the trees, towards the man, but he was gone again. Vanished into the deepening gloom. The rustling sound stopped abruptly, and the leaves fell still, lying inert on the ground. The message dissolving into random debris. I stood there for a long moment, trembling, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? Break camp and hike out in the dark, with a headlamp that would only pierce squares a few feet of this oppressive blackness or stay here, inside the tent, and hope that whatever this was, it couldn't cross the threshold. The rational part of my brain had been completely silenced. There was no explaining this away. This was something else, something old and wrong. I made a decision, fueled by pure adrenaline and fear. I had to get out. I had to get back to the truck. I didn't care about the dark. I didn't care about the distance. I started frantically pulling up the tent stakes, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the thin metal. I wasn't being neat. I was just yanking them out of the ground, stuffing the half-set-up tent, poles and all, into its stuffed sack. I didn't bother with the rain fly. I just crammed everything into my pack, not caring about organization, just wanting to be moving, to be gone from this place. Within 5 minutes, I had my pack on my back, the straps haphazardly tightened. I was stumbling back towards the main trail, my headlamp on, its beam a pathetic yellow cone that did little to push back the utter blackness of the forest night. The trail ahead was a tunnel of darkness, the beam of my light catching the trunks of trees, making them seem like bars. The world outside my small circle of light was a void, a solid wall of black. I started walking, then jogging, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the pack slamming against my back with every step. The sound of my own movement was deafening in the silence, a frantic, panicked rhythm of crunching gravel and labored breathing. I tried to listen for anything else, for the river, for the wind, for that terrible whisper, but there was nothing, just my own noise. Felt like I was making a spectacle of myself, a noisy, clumsy animal running through a sleeping world that was now very much awake and watching me. I'd been running for maybe 10 minutes when I saw a light up ahead, a steady, warm yellow light like a lantern. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I almost cried out, "Another hiker, thank God." Another person, maybe a group camp for the night. I could warn them we could hike out together, safety in numbers. I slowed to a walk, trying to catch my breath, trying to look less like a madman as I got closer. I could see the light was coming from a small, old-fashioned kerosene lantern sitting on a large, flat rock right beside the trail, its flame burning steady and bright, casting a warm, inviting circle of light, but there was no one around, no tent, no campfire. Just this single lantern sitting alone in the middle of nowhere. It was beautiful, beacon in the darkness, but it was also utterly wrong. Who would leave a lit lantern unattended on a trail? It didn't make any sense. I approached it cautiously, my fear momentarily overridden by confusion. The lantern was real. I could feel the heat coming off its glass chimney. I could smell the faint odor of kerosene. It was no illusion. It was a physical object, sitting there on the rock as if it had been placed there moments before I arrived. As I stood there staring at it, the whisper came again, but this time it didn't come from the woods. It seemed to come from the lantern itself, from the flame. The voice was still dry and papery, but it was softer now, almost gentle. It said, "Theodore, you're lost. Sit a while, rest." The voice was hypnotic, a siren's call in the darkness. The warmth of the lantern felt so good on my cold face. The light was so comforting after the terrifying blackness. A part of me wanted to listen too. Just sit down on the rock and rest. To stop running, my legs felt like lead. My shoulders ached from the pack. It would be so easy to just stop, to give in. But the memory of the leaf message, "You shouldn't have stopped," flashed in my mind. A jolt of pure terror. This was another trick, another lure. I took a step back from the lantern, my heart pounding. "No." I whispered, my voice hoarse. "No, I'm not staying." As soon as I said it, the lantern's flame flickered and died, not like it was blown out, but like it was snuffed out in an instant, plunging me back into absolute darkness. The sudden blackness was so complete it was like being struck blind. I fumbled for my headlamp, clicking the switch, but nothing happened. I clicked it again and again, panic rising in my throat. The batteries were dead. They were brand new. I'd put them in this morning. They couldn't be dead, but they were. The light was gone. I was alone in the pitch black, standing on a trail I could no longer see, surrounded by a forest that wanted me to stay. I started to hyperventilate, my chest tight, spots dancing in my vision. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. After a minute, my eyes began to adjust. Just a little. The moon must have been rising somewhere behind the clouds, because a faint, ghostly light began to filter through the canopy, enough to see the pale ribbon of the trail at my feet. It was something. It was enough to move. I started walking again, slower now, blindly, my arms outstretched to avoid walking into trees. Every shadow was a monster. Every rustle of my own clothing was the whisper returning. I have no idea how long I walked like that. Maybe an hour, maybe two. Time had lost all meaning. I was a machine, just putting one foot in front of the other, my whole world reduced to the faint gray path and the overwhelming dread pressing in on me from all sides. Was so focused on the ground, on not stumbling, that I almost didn't notice the change in the air. A faint, familiar smell. It was wood smoke, the smell of a campfire. I looked up and ahead through the trees. I saw a flickering orange light, a real fire. And this time I could hear voices, low, murmuring voices. The sound was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Human conversation. I almost sobbed with relief. I hurried towards the light, the fear melting away. This was real. This had to be real. I broke through a final line of trees and into a small clearing. There was a crackling fire pit, and round it, sitting on logs, were 5 or 6 people. They were dressed in normal hiking clothes, modern jackets, fleece hats. They had backpacks. Leaning against the trees, they looked like any other group of backpackers. They turned as I stumbled into the firelight, their faces friendly, concerned. "Oh there, buddy," one of them said, a man with a bushy beard. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I just stood there, panting, tears of relief welling in my eyes. I got turned around. I stammered. My light died. "Come on, sit down," a woman said, smiling warmly. "Get warm by the fire. You're safe now." Her words were like a bomb. "You're safe now." I walked towards the fire, towards these people, my saviors. The warmth of the flames felt heavenly. I dropped my pack and sank onto a log they made space for. my body trembling with exhaustion and spent adrenaline. "Thanks," I said, my voice cracking. "You have no idea how glad I am to see you guys." The bearded man handed me a metal cup filled with something hot. "Here, drink this. It'll warm you up." I took it gratefully, warmth seeping into my frozen fingers. I took a sip. It was tea, hot and sweet. It tasted like life itself. I looked around at their faces, illuminated by the firelight. They all seemed so normal, so kind, but as I looked closer, something felt off. Their smiles were a little too fixed, their eyes a little too bright, and their clothing, now that I was really looking, seemed wrong. The styles were slightly off, the colors a little faded, like clothes from a decade ago. And the gear, the backpacks leaning against the trees, they were old external frame packs. Kind nobody uses anymore, the kind you see in thrift stores. The woman who had spoken to me was still smiling, her head cocked to the side. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice still warm, but with a curious probing tone. "Theo," I said, taking another sip of the tea. It was getting colder faster than it should have, and it had a faint, muddy aftertaste. "Theodore," the bearded man said, not a question, a statement. His smile never wavered. "We've been waiting for you," and as he said it, I saw all their eyes in unison flicker towards the trees behind me, and their smiles widened, stretching their faces into unnatural rictus grins. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to see what was there, but I had to. Slowly, dread rising like a tide inside me, I turned my head, and standing just outside the circle of firelight, dozens of them, dozens of the tall, gaunt figures standing perfectly still in a semicircle, their pale, milky eyes reflecting the firelight, all of them staring directly at me. And the man from the trail was at the front, his dry, dusty mouth curled into the faintest hint of a smile. It wasn't just a sound that sounded like my name. It was my name, Theodore, spoken in that raspy, papery voice, a voice that felt like it had no breath behind it, just friction. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins, every muscle in my body locked up. That wasn't possible. Nobody was out here who knew me. I hadn't signed a trail register. I told a buddy I was going to the White Mountains, but not which trail. There was no way. No way at all. I stood there paralyzed, my back feeling suddenly like a lead weight. My ears ringing in the suffocating silence, waiting for another sound, another whisper, but nothing came. The woods were a vacuum, a soundless, motionless painting. I finally forced myself to turn my head, my neck creaking with the tension, to look into the dark tangle of trees where the sound had come from. The undergrowth was a mess of fallen branches and thorny bushes. No one could be in there without making a tremendous amount of noise. There was no path, break in the vegetation, just a solid wall of nature. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. It sounded small and pathetic, swallowed by the trees. There was no answer. Of course there was no answer. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to get a grip on myself. I'm a rational guy, an engineer. I deal in facts and logic. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was the wind. A weird trick of the wind through the pines. Maybe it was a bird. Some kind of parrot that had escaped and learned to talk. That was insane. This was New Hampshire, not the rainforest. Maybe I was just tired. Dehydrated, hearing things. Yeah, that had to be it. The long drive, the altitude. It was making me imagine things. I nodded to myself, clinging to that explanation like a life raft. I decided to just keep walking, get to my planned campsite, make some food, get some rest. That would fix everything. I turned back to the trail and started walking, but my easy, confident stride was gone. My steps were hesitant, my head on a swivel, constantly scanning the woods on either side. The forest felt different now. The trees seemed to press in closer, the branches like skeletal arms reaching for me. The beautiful autumn colors now looked sickly, jaundiced. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, oppressive thing. Blankets smothering the world. I kept waiting for the sounds to return, for a bird to sing, for a squirrel to scamper up a tree, but nothing, absolutely nothing, just the soft, almost inaudible crunch of my own boots on the gravel. I pulled out my water bottle and took a long drink, my hand trembling slightly. The water was cold and tasted of plastic. It did nothing to ease the dry fear in my throat. I checked my watch. It was for 20. The light was fading fast, the sun completely behind the mountains now, throwing the whole valley into a deep, premature twilight. I needed to pick up the pace. I started walking faster, my eyes fixed on the trail ahead, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that I was being watched, that from every shadowy gap between the trees, those pale, unblinking eyes were following my progress. About 15 minutes later, I came to a small wooden bridge that crossed a feeder stream running into the main river. It was a simple thing, just a few planks with a handrail. As I stepped onto it, I heard the whisper again, this time from my left, from the direction of the tiny stream. It was the same dry, rustling voice, but it was fainter, like it was being carried on the water. It didn't say my name this time. It said, "Don't look back," a command, a warning. I stumbled, my boot catching on a warped plank. I almost fell, grabbing the rough wooden handrail to steady myself, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look. I stared straight ahead at the trail on the other side of the bridge, my knuckles white where I gripped the rail. I forced myself to take a step, then another, my body screaming at me to turn around, to see what was behind me. But that voice, that terrible, dry whisper held me in its thrall. Don't look back. I crossed the bridge like a man walking a tightrope, every sense hyper-aware. I could feel a presence behind me, a cold spot in the air, a pressure against my back. I reached the other side and broke into a half jog, my back bouncing uncomfortably, the straps digging into my shoulders. I didn't care. I just had to get away from that bridge, from that voice. I ran for what felt like an eternity, but was maybe only 2 or 3 minutes, until my lungs burned and the stitch clawed at my side. I had to stop, leaning over with my hands on my knees, gasping for air. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. When I straightened up, I saw it, a little way off the trail, nestled in a grove of birch trees, a perfect flat-tin sight. It was exactly what I'd been looking for, a clear patch of soft pine needles protected from the wind. It was ideal, a part of my brain. The rational part whispered that this was lucky, that I should stop here for the night, that I was spooked and needed to rest, but a deeper, or primal part of me screamed that this was wrong, that this spot felt offered, not found, that it was a trap, but the light was almost gone, and I was exhausted, shaken to my core. The thought of setting up my tent, of getting inside the familiar nylon walls was too tempting to resist. I decided to stay. I shrugged off my pack with a grunt of relief and started the routine of setting up camp. My movements mechanical, my ears still straining for any sound, but the silence held. As I was hammering the last tent stake into the soft ground, I heard a faint crackling sound, like static electricity or like dry leaves skittering across stone. It seemed to come from all around me. I stood up slowly, my hand still holding the metal stake. The sound grew slightly louder, a soft, insistent rustling. And then I saw them out of the corner of my eye, movement in the trees. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I might see, and there, between the white trunks of the birch trees, standing perfectly still, was the man again, the same gaunt man in the old-fashioned clothes. He was farther away this time, maybe 100 feet into the woods. Just a dark silhouette against the fading light, but I could still make out the pale discs of his eyes fixed on me. He wasn't moving, he was just watching. The rustling sound wasn't coming from him, it was coming from the ground. I looked down, and all around my tent site, scattered on the pine needles, were dozens of papery brown birch leaves, and they were moving, skittering and trembling in place, vibrating as if caught in a tiny localized earthquake, but there was no wind. The air was utterly still. The leaves trembled and shook, arranging themselves, and as I watched, my breath caught in my throat. They formed letters, then words, spelling out a message in the dirt right in front of my boots. The words written in trembling, dead leaves. It said, "You shouldn't have stopped." The world seemed to shrink to the space around the campfire. Crackle of the flames was the only sound, a sound that now felt menacing, like laughter. The warmth I had felt just moments before was gone, replaced by a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the night air. People around the fire were still smiling those fixed, terrible smiles, their eyes locked on me, waiting. The bearded man who had given me the tea leaned forward, his face now looking waxy and unreal in the firelight. "They've been so lonely, Theodore," he said, his voice taking on that same dry, papery quality I'd heard in the whisper there. "So glad you decided to stay." I tried to stand up, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey me. They felt like they were made of stone. A heavy leaden numbness was spreading through my body, starting from my stomach where the tea had settled, a cold, dead weight. I looked down at the metal cup in my hand. The dregs of the liquid inside were dark and thick like mud and moving, swirling with tiny specks of something that looked like rotten leaves. I dropped the cup with a cry of disgust. It hit the ground with a dull thud. The people around the fire didn't react. They just kept smiling, their heads tilting in unison as if curious about my sudden movement. I forced myself to look back at the circle of figures standing in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They hadn't moved. They were statues, silent sentinels watching this bizarre tableau, their presence presence was a physical pressure, a weight on my soul. The man from the trail, the one I'd seen first, took a single, silent step forward, his boot making no sound on the forest floor. He raised one long, bony finger and pointed not at me, but at my backpack, which lay where I dropped it in the dirt. The bearded man by the fire nodded, his smile widening impossibly further. "He wants you to open it," he rasped, his voice no longer even pretending to be human. It was the sound of dead leaves skittering over stone. "Open your pack, Theodore." I shook my head. A feeble, helpless gesture, tears of pure terror welling in my eyes. "No," I whispered, the word barely audible. The figures in the darkness didn't react, but the people around the fire all stopped smiling at once, their faces going blank, empty, their eyes becoming flat and dull like painted stones. The woman who had first spoken to me stood up, her movements stiff, jerky like a marionette on strings. She walked over to my pack and picked it up with an unnatural strength, hauling it towards me and dropping it at my feet. The impact seemed to wake me from my paralysis. A surge of adrenaline cutting through the numbness. I lunged not for the pack, but away from it, scrambling backwards on my hands and knees, away from the fire, away from these things. The gravel of the trail scraped my palms, but I didn't care. I had to get away. I managed to get to my feet, my legs wobbling beneath me, and I turned to run, but the circle of figures was there. They had moved without a sound. They now formed a solid wall around the entire clearing, their pale eyes glowing in the dark, their arms hanging limply at their sides. There was no gap, no way through. I was trapped. A whimper escaped my lips. I backed away until I felt the heat of the fire on my calves. The people, the things that looked like people, were all standing now, facing me, their expressions still blank, waiting. The man from the trail took another step forward. Now he was at the very edge of the firelight. I could see the intricate weave of his old wool coat, the deep grooves on his face. He pointed again at the pack at my feet, his meaning unmistakable, the command absolute. My hands trembling so violently I could barely function. I fumbled with the clips on my pack, my fingers numb and clumsy. I had to know. I had to see what they wanted me to see. I finally got the main compartment open, and the smell that wafted out made me gag. It was the smell of decay, of damp earth and rotting things, of a grave opened after a long time. I reached inside, expecting to feel the familiar shape of my tent, my food bag, my sleeping bag, but my hand closed around something cold and damp and fibrous, like roots. I pulled it out, and a scream caught in my throat. It was my sleeping bag, but it was changed. It was filthy, caked in mud and mold, and it was sprouting tiny, pale mushrooms, and fuzzy white mold grew from its surface. It smelled of a wet cellar, of things long forgotten. I dropped it in horror and reached in again, pulling out my stuffed sack of clothes. The synthetic fabric was slimy to the touch, disintegrating in my hands. The clothes inside were rotten, riddled with holes, as if they'd been buried for years. A food bag was worse. The dehydrated meals were bloated, pulpy sacks of putrid goo. Crawling with fat, white maggots, I recoiled, falling back onto the ground, my stomach heaving. Everything in my pack, Everything I brought from the world was ruined, decayed, transformed into something dead and forgotten. The man from the trail nodded slowly, a gesture of satisfaction, and then he spoke aloud for the first time, his voice not a whisper now, but a dry, hollow rasp, like a dead tree scraping against another in the wind. "You are here now," he said. "You are with us. Your things are of this place now, as you will be." He gestured to the people around the fire, and I saw them clearly for what they were. Their faces were beginning to crack and peel like old paint. Their eyes were becoming milky and vacant. Their clothes were fading, decaying before my very eyes, becoming period costumes. They were not rescuers, they were previous visitors. People who had stopped, people who had stayed, and they were being replaced, absorbed. The terror that shot through me was so pure it was electric. I scrambled backwards, on my elbows, away from the pack, away from the fire, away from the advancing figures. My back hit something solid, another pair of legs. I looked up into the blank, smiling face of the bearded man, his eyes now completely white, his beard crawling with what looked like moss. He reached down for me, his fingers stained with dirt, his nails long and thick like yellowed claws. I screamed then, a raw, primal sound that tore through the silent night. I rolled away, lurching to my feet, and without thinking, I ran straight towards the wall of figures, towards the man from the trail. A desperate, suicidal charge. I expected to hit a solid wall, to be grabbed by a dozen cold hands. But as I plunged into their ranks, they parted. They didn't move. They just became insubstantial. Like smoke, I passed through them, a sensation of intense cold washing over me, a feeling of profound emptiness, like diving into a frozen lake. And then I was through. I was on the other side, stumbling into the dark woods. I didn't look back. I just ran, branches whipping at my face, tearing at my clothes. I ran blindly, crashing through the undergrowth, no longer on any trail, just running away from that hellish firelight, from those terrible faces. I ran until my lungs were on fire, until my legs gave out, and I collapsed into a heap at the base of a giant pine tree, sobbing uncontrollably. The forest around me was silent once more. The illusion of safety provided by the other hikers was gone. I was alone again, truly alone. With whatever those things were, I curled into a ball, shivering, waiting for the sound of dry whispers, for the sight of pale eyes in the dark, but nothing came. The night was still, and in that stillness, a new horror dawned on me, a slow, creeping realization as I lay there. I brought my hand up to wipe the tears from my face, and in the faint moonlight, I saw my skin. It was pale, almost gray, and it had a strange, dry texture like parchment, and when I touched my cheek, my fingertips felt cold and numb. I stared at my hand in the dim light, turning it over and over. The skin did look different. It was sallow, waxy, like old cheese, and it felt cold to my own touch, a deep, internal cold that no amount of rubbing could warm. This couldn't be real. It was the light. It was the fear. It was a trick of my mind. I had to keep moving. I had to find the river. If I could find the river, I could follow it back to the trailhead. It was my only hope, my only tether to the real world. I pushed myself up, my body aching, every muscle Protesting, I felt 100 years old. My joints were stiff, my movements slow and creaky. I listened for the sound of water, but the silence was absolute. I had no idea which way to go. I was completely disoriented, lost in a sea of trees that all looked the same. I picked a direction at random and started walking, my progress agonizingly slow. I had to push through thickets that clawed at my clothes, my jacket tearing on sharp branches. The cold was getting worse, seeping into my bones, a damp, clinging cold that felt ancient after what felt like an hour of stumbling through the darkness. I saw a faint glow ahead, not the warm orange of a fire, but a cool, silvery light. Hope, frail and desperate, flickered in my chest. Maybe it was the moon reflecting off the river. I pushed towards it, the undergrowth thinning as I got closer. Broke through into another small clearing, and my hope died instantly. It wasn't the river. In the center of the clearing stood a single, massive oak tree, its branches bare and twisted against the night sky, and hanging from almost every branch, swaying gently in a non-existent breeze, were lanterns, dozens of them, identical to the one I'd seen on the trail, old kerosene lanterns, each with a cold, silver flame burning inside. They cast a sickly, phosphorescent light that illuminated the clearing in stark, monochrome detail. The light didn't flicker, it was steady and dead, like the light from a black and white television. And in the center of the clearing, sitting on the ground with his back against the giant oak, was a man. He was dressed in modern hiking gear, a bright blue fleece jacket, nylon pants. He had a backpack beside him. He looked up as I entered the clearing, his face drawn and terrified, but alive, human. "Oh, thank God," he whispered, his voice cracking with relief. "Another person. I thought I was going crazy." I just stood at the edge of the clearing, wary, afraid. Was this real? Was he real? He looked real. His fear looked genuine. What is this place?" I asked, my voice a dry croak. "I don't know," he said, shaking his head, his eyes wide. "I got lost. My GPS died. My compass is spinning. I've been walking in circles for hours. I found this clearing and these lights." He gestured weakly at the lanterns. "I can't put them out. I tried." I took a hesitant step into the clearing. The silver light felt cold on my skin. It was a sterile, dead light. "We have to get out of here," I said. "There are things out there," he nodded frantically. "I know, I've heard them, whispers, and I saw figures standing in the trees watching me." He tried to stand, but he seemed weak, unsteady. "Mark. By the way," he said, offering a trembling hand. I didn't take it. I just stared at him, at his blue jacket. It was so bright, so vivid in this monochrome world. It was the only color in the entire clearing. "Theo," I said finally, "we need to go now." "Which way?" he asked, his voice desperate. "I don't know. Anyway, just away from here," I said, turning to leave the clearing, to go back the way I came. "Wait," Mark said. "Look. Water is almost gone. Do you have any? I'm so thirsty." He fumbled with his pack, pulling out a nearly empty plastic water bottle. I looked at my own hands, empty. My pack was gone, back at that nightmare campfire with all my rotten gear. "Don't have anything," I said, a pang of guilt hitting me. He looked so pathetic, so scared. "Please," he begged, just a sip. I haven't had anything in hours. I took a step towards him against my better judgment. My own throat was parched. I'm sorry, I really don't. I began, but as I got closer, I saw it. Something was wrong with his face. In the unnatural silver light, his skin had a grayish tint, just like mine, but there was more. Round his eyes, the skin was cracked like old paint, and deep in the cracks I could see something moving, something small and white like maggots. I froze, my blood running cold. He saw the look on my face and his own expression changed. The fear melting away, replaced by a look of infinite sadness, of resignation. You see it, don't you? He said, his voice flat. It's already got me. He pulled up the sleeve of his blue fleece jacket, and underneath, his arm was not skin. It was bark, rough gray bark, like the skin of the oak tree he was leaning against. Tiny tendrils like roots were weaving their way out of his sleeve. Digging into the soil beneath him, I stopped to rest, he said, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. The tear looked black in the silver light. I sat down against this tree just for a minute. I couldn't get up. It's holding me here. It's making me part of it. I stared in horror, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. The roots were moving slowly, inexorably, anchoring him to the spot, weaving through his clothes. Into his flesh, the lanterns. I whispered, "What are they?" He looked up at the cold, silver flames. "I think they're others," he said, his voice becoming fainter, more raspy. "Others who stopped, their lights gone out. But it's still here, trapped like a photograph." As he spoke, his voice began to change, taking on that familiar, dry, papery quality. "You should go, Theodore," he whispered, and his eyes began to cloud over, turning pale and milky. "Don't look back. Don't stop. Don't close your eyes." I backed away, my heart breaking for him. Even as terror consumed me. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry." He didn't answer. His head lolled forward, his body becoming still, rigid. The roots quickened their pace, crawling over his legs. His chest, the bright blue of his jacket, began to fade to bleach of all color, becoming gray, then brown, then the same color as the bark spreading up his neck. The lanterns above him began to sway faster, their silver flames burning brighter, and from all around the clearing, from the dark woods beyond the circle of light, I heard the whisper, not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. A chorus of dry, rustling voices. They were saying my name, Theodore, Theodore, Theodore. I turned and ran, crashing back into the woods, blind with panic. The whispers followed me, just from behind, but from the trees themselves, from the air. The sound was inside my head. A relentless, rustling chant of my name. I ran until my lungs were raw, until the sound of the whispers was drowned out by the blood pounding in my ears. I fell to my knees, vomiting nothing but bile, my body convulsing with sobs and dry heaves. When I finally looked up, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, I saw something familiar, a wide, flat path, gravel under my knees. I was back on the Lincoln Woods Trail. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. I was saved. I'd found the trail. All I had to do was follow it back to the highway, back to my truck. I stood up, a new energy filling me. I started to run. Down the trail, following its gentle curve, the whispers had stopped. The forest was silent again. But it was a watchful silence. I ran for 5 minutes, 10. The trail should have been leading me back towards the river, towards the bridge, but I didn't recognize any of it. The trees looked different, twisted, older. And then I saw it up ahead, the giant oak tree, the clearing with the silver lanterns. I skidded to a halt, my breath catching in my throat. It was impossible. I had run in a straight line down the trail. I hadn't turned off. How was I back here? I approached the clearing slowly. Dread a cold stone in my gut. Mark was still there, but he was almost completely gone. His form was now little more than a man-shaped growth on the trunk of the tree. His face a smooth, featureless mask of bark. Only a single, pale, milky eye remained. Staring out into nothingness, his blue jacket was now a part of the tree, a faded gray strip of cloth absorbed into the wood and hanging from a branch directly. But what was left of his head, a new lantern now swung gently, its silver flame. Inside the glass, I could see a faint, tiny flicker of blue, the last remnant of his spirit. His color trapped forever. The whispers started again, but this time they were not saying my name. They were saying something else, a single word over and over, a command, a curse, a verdict. Stay, stay, stay. The word stay echoed in the dead air, not a request but a law. A fundamental truth of this place that was being impressed upon me. I backed away from the clearing, from the terrible tree and its collection of silver souls. My mind reeling, the trail was a liar. It didn't lead out. It led back in. It was a loop. A trap designed to keep you circling, to wear you down, to make you stop. I couldn't trust it. I had to get off it. I had to go cross country, find. Forever by brute force, I turned and plunged into the woods, leaving the gravel path behind. This was madness. Bushwhacking in the White Mountains at night is a good way to fall off a cliff or break a leg. But staying on the trail meant ending up like Mark, a part of the furniture. I pushed through thick stands of spruce, the branches slapping me in the face, their needles scratching at my eyes. The ground was uneven, riddled with hidden holes and ankle-twisting roots. I fell constantly, picking myself up each time. My clothes now torn and soaked with mud and sweat. The cold was inside me now, permanent resident in my bones. I could feel it in my teeth, a constant dull ache. I kept checking my hands, terrified of seeing more changes, but in the dark, it was hard to tell. The skin just felt numb and thick, like I was wearing gloves. I walked for what felt like hours. My sense of direction completely gone. The moon was hidden by a thick blanket of clouds, offering no guidance. The only thing that kept me going was the faint, desperate hope of hearing the river, but the forest was as silent as a tomb. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the crunch of my footsteps. Eventually, the trees began to thin, and I stumbled out onto a large, flat rock expanse, a granite ball that offered a view of the surrounding mountains. Or it would have if it weren't the middle of the night. I sank to my knees, exhausted, my body screaming for rest. I looked up at the sky, hoping for stars, for some familiar constellation to orient myself, but the cloud cover was total, solid, featureless ceiling of black. That's when I saw the lights, not the silver lanterns, but distant, clustered together in the valley below a town. It had to be Lincoln or Woodstock, one of the towns along the Concamagus Highway. A real town with real people, cars, phones, safety. The sight was so beautiful it made my chest hurt. It was maybe a few miles away, down a steep slope, but it was there. Beacon of the real world. I wasn't lost. I could see my way out. I started to cry again, this time with relief. I began to pick my way down the rock face. My movements clumsy with exhaustion but fueled by newfound hope. The descent was treacherous. The granite was slick with dew, and in the dark, every shadow was a potential drop-off. I moved slowly, carefully, my eyes fixed on the town lights. I lifelined. After a half hour of painstaking climbing down, I reached the tree line again. The woods here were different, younger, with more beech and maple. I pushed through them. The lights getting brighter, closer. I could almost smell the wood smoke from fireplaces. I burst out of the trees onto a well-maintained gravel road, a real road, with power lines running alongside it. I wanted to kiss the gravel. I was out. I had made it. I followed the road, walking quickly now, practically running towards the lights, which were just around a bend up ahead. The road felt solid and real under my feet, a human thing. I rounded the bend. My hope curdled in my chest. It wasn't a town. The lights were coming from a single large, old-fashioned building, a long, low structure made of dark wood, with a wide porch wrapped around it. Light streamed from its windows, and a sign hung over the door, illuminated by a single bulb. It read, Pimiciosit Trail Lodge. I'd never heard of it. There was no lodge out here. The parking lot in front was empty, except for one vehicle. My heart leapt into my throat. It was my truck, my old Ford Ranger, parked right there next to the porch as if I'd driven here. This was wrong. This was so deeply wrong, but the sight of my truck, my escape, was too powerful to resist. I ran to it, yanking on the door handle. It was unlocked. The keys were even in the ignition. I slid inside. Familiar smell of old coffee and vinyl washing over me, a smell of home, of safety. I sobbed with relief, turning the key. The engine cranked once, twice, and then roared to life. The headlights blazed to life, illuminating the road ahead. Thank God, oh thank God, I threw it into drive and stomped on the gas. Tires spun on the gravel for a second before catching, and I sped down the road. Away from the creepy lodge, the headlights cut a swath through the darkness. The world outside the beams was impenetrable black. I drove fast for the narrow road, my hands gripping the wheel like a lifeline. I just had to get to the highway. I'd find a ranger, police station, anything. I drove for 10 minutes, the road winding through the trees. But it never seemed to change. It was just a constant curve, one bend after another. I glanced at the fuel gauge. It was on full. The trip meter read 0, like the truck had just been reset. I looked in the rearview mirror and my blood ran cold. The road behind me was gone, not dark, but gone, replaced by a wall of absolute blackness that was swallowing the road whole. Right behind my tailgate, it was like driving through a tunnel that was closing up behind me. Panic seized me. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The engine roared. The speedometer climbed. 50, 60, 70 miles an hour on a gravel road. The truck swerved dangerously, but I didn't care. I had to outrun it. The blackness behind me kept pace effortlessly. I looked ahead, and the headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road, the same gaunt man, his pale eyes reflecting the light. I screamed and swerved, jerking the wheel to avoid him. The tires lost traction. On the loose gravel, the world spun, a dizzying carousel of trees and darkness. The truck slammed into something with a sickening crunch of metal and glass. My head snapped forward and hit the steering wheel, and everything went black. I don't know how long I was. Out, seconds, minutes, I came to with a throbbing pain in my forehead. The smell of gasoline and burnt rubber filling the air. The windshield was a spider web of cracks. The engine was dead, hissing softly. I was alive. I stumbled out of the truck, my legs weak. The truck had hit a large tree. The front end was crumbled. Steam rising from the radiator. It was totaled. I looked around. I was back at the Pimichuaset Trail Lodge. My truck had crashed into a tree right in the empty parking lot. The lights from the lodge windows still glowed warmly. The front door opened, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall and well-dressed in a tweed jacket. Like an old-timey hotel manager, he had a kind, concerned face. Good heavens. "Son, are you all right?" he called out, his voice rich and warm. That was a terrible crash. "Come inside, let's get you looked at." I just stood there, swaying, staring at my wrecked truck. My escape gone. I need to call for help. I stammered. "My phone. It's in the truck." Of course. The man said, smiling warmly, "We have a telephone inside. Come in, please. You're bleeding." He seemed so normal, so genuine. But after everything, I couldn't trust it. I couldn't trust anything. I took a step back. "No, I should wait here," I said. The man's smile didn't falter, but his eyes changed. Just for a fraction of a second, a flicker of impatience, of something cold. "Nonsense," he said, his voice still friendly, but with an edge of command. "It's cold out here. You're in shock. Come inside. Theodore." He knew my name. Of course he knew my name. Everyone here knew my name. I looked from the wreck of my truck to the warm, inviting light of the lodge. I felt a terrifying pull, a desire to just give in, to go inside, to sit by a fire, to let someone else take care of it. It would be so easy. The man saw my hesitation and his smile widened. "That's it," he coaxed. "Come inside and stay a while." The word "stay" snapped me out of it. It was the same word from the whispers. I turned and ran, not towards the road, but around the side of the lodge into the dark woods. Behind it, "Theodore, wait," the man called, his voice now sharp, displeased. But he didn't follow me. I heard the lodge door shut with a firm, final click. I ran into the trees, not caring where I was going, just away from that place, from that smiling man. I ran until the lights of the lodge were gone, and I was once again swallowed by the silent, hungry forest. I collapsed against a tree, sliding down to the ground, utterly broken. I had no escape, no hope. The forest was playing with me, offering me illusions of safety only to shatter them. It was hurting me, wearing me down, and I knew, with a cold certainty, that it was only a matter of time before I stopped, before I gave up. And when I did, I would become like Mark, like the man on the trail, another permanent resident, another silver lantern in the endless, silent night. I pulled my knees to my chest and rocked back and forth, the numbness in my skin spreading, a strange, woody stiffness settling into my joints, and for the first time I heard the whisper not from outside, but from within my own mind, a dry, rustling thought that was not my own. It said, "Just close your eyes, rest. It will be easier if you don't. Fight, and God help me, I was so tired, so cold, that it sounded like good advice." Temptation to listen to that internal whisper was overwhelming, a seductive pull towards oblivion, to just let go and let the cold and the silence take me. It would be so much easier than fighting, than running, than feeling this soul-crushing terror. I could just close my eyes and it would all be over. The numbness would become complete, and I would become part of the forest. A thought that should have been horrifying, but now felt oddly peaceful, like sinking into a deep, dreamless sleep. I started to let my eyes drift shut, my body slumping against a tree. Cold ground feeling almost comfortable, like a bed. For a long day, but then a sound pierced the silence, a real sound, a familiar sound. It was the distant, faint, but unmistakable rush of the Bemidji-said river. It was there, it was real, and it was flowing towards the highway, towards the world. That sound was a lifeline, a jolt of electricity to my fading heart. I forced my eyes open, pushing myself upright with a groan, every muscle screaming. In protest, the woody stiffness in my joints was real. I could feel it, a lack of flexibility. Like my knees and elbows were slowly fusing. I had to get to the river. Water finds a way out, and if I could follow it, it would lead me out too. I oriented myself towards the sound and started walking, my gait now a stiff, shuffling limp. River sound was my compass, my mantra. I focused on it, clinging to it, using it to block out the whispering in my mind that begged me to stop, to sleep, to stay. The forest seemed to resist my new purpose. The undergrowth became thicker, thorny bushes grabbing at my legs, low branches seeming to dip down to block my path. It was trying to slow me down, to tire me out. But I pushed on, a desperate, stubborn determination taking hold. Wasn't going to become a lantern. I wasn't going to become fertilizer for some ancient tree. I was Theodore. I was from Boston. I had a job, friends, a life, and I was going back to it. The river's sound grew louder, more distinct. I could hear individual rocks tumbling in the current, the splash of water against the bank. It was close. So close I pushed through a final wall of ferns, and there it was, the wide, beautiful, rushing Bemidji-said, its surface glittering in the faint, ambient light. It was the most wonderful thing I had ever seen. I stumbled down the bank and fell to my knees at the water's edge, plunging my hands into the icy flow. The cold was shocking, painful, but it was a real, clean, natural cold. It felt like life. I cupped my hands and drank. The water was so cold it made my teeth ache, but it was clean and fresh, washing the taste of fear and decay from my mouth. I splashed it on my face, the shock helping to clear the fog of exhaustion from my mind for the first time in hours. I felt a glimmer of real hope. I looked downstream, the river carved a path. Through the forest, a clear route out. All I had to do was follow it. I stood up, filled with new resolve, and began to walk along the bank. The going was tough. The bank was uneven and strewn with rocks and driftwood, but it was nothing compared to the nightmare I'd just been through. I kept the river on my right, my eyes fixed on the water. A constant, moving reminder that this place had an exit. I walked for what felt like another hour. The sky began to lighten ever so slightly, a deep, pre-dawn gray that slowly leaks the utter blackness. From the world, I could see the shapes of trees now. Rather than just sensing them, the dawn was coming, a new day. The thought was almost too beautiful to bear. Maybe the things in the forest, the whispers, figures, maybe they were creatures of the night and the sunrise would break their power. I allowed myself to hope, to imagine seeing the sun crest the mountains. I rounded a bend in the river and saw a shape on the opposite bank, something large and man-made. My heart leapt. It was a bridge, the same small wooden bridge I'd crossed hours ago, the one where I'd heard the whisper, "Don't look back." I was back on the Lincoln Woods trail, the real trail. I had to be. This was the bridge that led back to the parking lot. I was almost there. I scrambled across the river, using exposed rocks as stepping stones. The water was freezing, soaking my boots, but I didn't care. I clambered up the far bank and onto the trail. It was definitely the same bridge. I was saved. All I had to do was walk straight down this wide, flat path and it would take me right to my truck or what was left of it, but I didn't care. I'd walk all the way to Lincoln if I had to. I just had to get out. I stepped onto the trail, a genuine smile breaking across my face for the first time since I'd arrived. I took a step, then another, and then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic, crunching sound behind me, the sound of footsteps on gravel matching my pace exactly. My smile vanished, my blood turning to ice. I stopped and the footsteps stopped too. I didn't want to turn around. I knew what I would see, but I had to. Slowly, bed weighing down every movement, I turned my head and there he was, the gaunt man, standing 10 feet behind me on the trail, his pale eyes fixed on me, his hands at his sides. He had followed me. He had been following me the whole time, waiting. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched, a silent, patient hunter. A scream built in my throat, but I choked it down. No, I was not giving up. I was not stopping. I turned and started to run, my stiff, aching legs protesting. I ran down the trail, my eyes fixed on the path ahead. I could hear his footsteps behind me, a steady, unhurried crunch on the gravel. He wasn't running, he was walking, but he was keeping pace with me, no matter how fast I ran. The footsteps remained the same distance behind me, a constant, terrifying presence. The sky was getting lighter, the world taking on shape and color, but the colors were still wrong. Muted, washed out like an old photograph, I ran and ran. My lungs burning, my legs screaming, the trail seemed to stretch on forever. It should have ended by now. I should be able to see the parking lot, but there was nothing ahead. Just the endless tunnel of trees. The footsteps behind me never faltered, never got closer, never fell behind, just a constant rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was still there, 10 feet back, walking calmly, his expression blank, and behind him the trail was empty, but it was different. The trees along the path were changing, their trunks were becoming twisted, their branches barren, and hanging from them were silver lanterns, dozens of them lining the trail like street lights, casting their cold, dead light, illuminating the path not forward, but back into the heart of the forest. I was not running towards escape. I was running deeper in. The trail was leading me nowhere. It was a show, performance for my benefit, to make me think I had a chance. I skidded to a halt, my body giving out. I fell to my knees on the gravel, sobbing, utterly defeated. The footsteps behind me stopped. I didn't need to look. I knew he was standing there, waiting. I could feel his cold, empty presence. The sun began to rise, but it was not the warm, golden sun of morning. It was a pale, silver disk that rose behind the mountains, casting no warmth, offering no hope. Its light was the same as the lanterns, a cold, dead light that revealed the true nature of this place. World of gray and silver and silence. The whisper came then, not from behind me, but from all around, from the trees, from the river, from the silver sun. It was the voice of the forest itself, dry and ancient and immense. It said, Theodore, you have run well, you have fought hard, but the game is over. It is time to rest. It is time to stay. I looked down at my hands resting on the gravel. I saw that the skin was no longer skin. It was rough gray bark. My fingers were stiffening, becoming twigs. Roots were beginning to push from my wrists, seeking the soil beneath the gravel. I felt no panic anymore, no fear, just a profound, weary acceptance. The numbness was complete. I was so tired. I looked up one last time towards where the parking lot should have been, and I saw my truck, my old Ford Ranger, parked right there as if it had been waiting for me. The door was open, inviting a last cruel illusion offered by the forest. A final joke, and standing next to the truck was the gunman, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the driver's seat, and sitting in the driver's seat with his hands on the wheel was me. Version of me with pale, milky eyes and a faint, contented smile, already at peace, already home. I'd understood then. I had never really left. I had stopped the moment I'd first seen him on the trail. The rest had just been a story, a dream the forest had woven for me as it slowly took me apart and made me part of itself. Real me was already here, had always been here. I lowered my head, the last of my strength gone, my body settling, rooting into the gravel of the trail. My thoughts slowing, becoming simple, arboreal. The last human feeling to fade was not fear, but a deep, aching loneliness. And then there was only silence and the gentle silver light of a sun that gave no warmth, and the satisfying slow growth of roots into deep, dark, cold earth. The silence that followed wasn't an absence of sound, but a new kind of presence, a dense, living quiet that hummed with a slow, vegetative pulse. I was aware of the gravel beneath what used to be my knees, each individual stone a distinct pressure against the rough bark that had become my skin. I could feel the tiny vibrations of the earth, the deep, ancient stretch of roots from trees far older than any human thought, and I could feel my own roots then and new pushing down, seeking purchase in the cold, stony soil. The transformation wasn't painful. It was a profound unraveling, a dissolution of the frantic, chattering self I had been, the fear, the hope, the memory of a life called Theodore. It all felt like a dream receding, a story I had been told once and was now forgetting. The world, through my new perception, was a tapestry of pressure and time. I could feel the weight of the mountains, the ancient sleep of the granite beneath me, the slow, relentless flow of the river, a constant cold thread woven through the land. And I could feel the others, the ones who had stopped before me. Their presences were like knots in the fabric of the forest. Some were deep and old, slumbering giants whose thoughts moved with the glacial pace of centuries. Others were newer, their essence still humming with the faint, fading echoes of their human panic. Like Mark, the man with the blue jacket, his consciousness was a nearby whisper, a silvery flicker of regret trapped in the heart of the oak. And then there was the gaunt man. My gaunt man, the one who had first found me. His presence was different. He wasn't a prisoner like the rest of us. He was a shepherd, a part of the forest's will. His essence was a cold, focused point of intention, and he was standing over me, not with malice, but with a sense of completion, of a task finished. I felt his dry, papery touch on what was left of my hair, now feeling more like lichen or moss. It was not a caress, but an adjustment, a gardener tending to a new planting. He spoke then, not with a voice, but by impressing the meaning directly into my awareness. Thought that felt like the rustling of a million dead leaves. You are home now. The struggle is over. You will stand sentinel. You will watch and you will wait. The meaning was clear. This was my purpose now, to be a part of the Lord, to become a fixture in the landscape that would help ensnare the next one, the next lonely soul who sought solitude in these woods and found instead a permanent, silent audience. The silver sun climbed higher in the gray sky, its light a constant, unchanging twilight, as its beams filtered through the branches of the trees that were now my brothers and sisters. I saw them, the true inhabitants of this place. They began to step from behind trees, to rise from the ferns, to separate themselves from the shadows. They were not all gaunt men. There were women too, with long gray hair like moss, and children with eyes like dark pools. Their forms were humanoid, but woven from the forest itself, skin of bark and lichen, hair of pine needles, eyes of polished river stone that held the same pale, milky light. They moved silently, gracefully, their feet making no impression on the forest floor. They gathered around me in a wide circle, their stone eyes fixed on my changing form. They were welcoming me, their expressions not joyful, but solemn, reverent. This was a ceremony, a changing of the guard. I was the newest member of their silent chorus. One of the reasons these woods felt so watched, so alive. To the few hikers with the sensitivity to feel it, the air itself began to shimmer, and the images appeared, flickering like projections on a screen of mist. I saw a family picnicking by the river in the 1920s, their laughter soundless, their clothes fading as a figure made of shadow and leaves approached them. I saw a lone trapper from a century before, his his muzzle odor useless against the creeping vines that pulled him into the earth. I saw a couple from the 1970s. Their Volkswagen van parked at a trailhead that no longer existed, wandering off the path. Lured by the sound of beautiful music that only they could hear, each story ended the same way. But the stillness, the transformation, the addition of another silver lantern hanging from a branch. This was the history of this place. Its grim harvest played for me, the new initiate, so I would understand the depth and age of the thing I had joined. It was not just a haunted forest. It was a predator, an ecosystem that fed on loneliness and curiosity. It had been here long before the first European settlers gave these mountains names. Long before the native tribes whispered warnings about the spirit that walked in the woods of stone and light. The procession of images faded and the forest people began to drift away, melting back into the trees until only the gaunt man remained. He looked down at me one last time. I felt a final clear thought, watched the path, and then he was gone, leaving me alone on the trail, my body now fully anchored, my legs fused into a single sturdy trunk, my arms stretching into bare, twisting branches against the gray sky. My vision was no longer from two eyes, but a panoramic, immersive awareness of the stretch of trail ahead. And behind, I could see every stone, every dip, every shadow. I could feel the approach of a chipmunk, its tiny heart a frantic drumbeat of life that skittered past my roots. Unaware of the new sentinel had passed, and then I felt something else heavier. Slower vibration coming down the trail, the crunch of boots on gravel, the labored rhythm of a human breath. A new hiker was coming, a solo figure, a man with a red backpack, his thoughts a visible cloud of worry and escape. He was thinking about his job, his divorce, seeking peace in the wilderness, just as I had. He hadn't seen me yet, but I saw him, I felt him, the forest felt him. His loneliness was a beacon, a delicious scent on the still air, and from deep within my core, from the place where Theodore's voice had been, a new impulse formed. Not a thought, but an instinct, a need to fulfill my purpose. I felt a strange sensation in my branches, a tightness. I realized with a distant horror that I was not just to watch. I was to participate. As the man drew closer, my branches, now bare and silvered, began to tremble, and from the tips of them a soft, cold light began to bloom, not the warm yellow of a firefly, but the dead, silver light of the lanterns. I was becoming a lantern myself, a beacon on the trail, and from my core, a sound began to build, a dry, rustling whisper that pushed its way out from between the cracks in my bark. It was not my voice. It was the forest's voice, using me as its instrument, and the whisper floated down the trail towards the unsuspecting man. A siren's call of false solace, it whispered his name. The name that rustled from my bark was David. It hung in the dead air, a dry leaf caught in an unseen current. It floated down the trail towards the man with the red pack. He stopped walking, his head cocked, his expression shifting. From weary contemplation to confused alertness, he hadn't heard a bird or an animal for miles. The sudden, clear whisper of his own name was a shock to his system. I could feel his heartbeat accelerate, a quick, nervous rhythm that vibrated through the soles of his boots and into the earth, into my roots. Hello. He called out, his voice too loud. A human sound that felt crude and out of place in the refined silence. He took a few cautious steps forward, his eyes scanning the trees. They passed over me, but I could feel his gaze slide away, not registering me as a former man, only as another tree among thousands. His perception was already being gently bent, softened by the atmosphere of this place. He was looking for the source of the voice. He was looking for a person, and the forest would not show him one. Not yet. The whisper had come from me, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Another trick of the acoustics here. He shook his head, muttering to himself about being jumpy, about the wind, but there was no wind. The air was perfectly still and cold. He adjusted his pack and kept walking, his steps more hesitant now. His earlier worries about his life back home were gone, replaced by a primal, low-grade anxiety. He was now fully in the present moment, and the present moment was this trail, this silence, and the feeling of being watched. I could feel his unease like a sour taste. It was nourishing. The forest drank it in, and I, part of the forest now, drank it in too, a deep, satisfying pull that made my new roots tingle. He walked for another 10 minutes. I watched him the entire time, my awareness locked onto him, my silver light glowing just faintly. A willow, the wisp that he sensed only in his peripheral vision, making him turn his head quickly, seeing nothing. The gaunt man was there. Too, I could feel his presence, a master puppeteer standing in the wings. He was behind a thicket of spruce, unseen, directing the show. He would step in when the time was right. David, the man with the red pack, began to see things. Little things at first, a flicker of movement where there was none, a shape in the trees that resolved into a stump when he stared at it. The forest was gently probing him, testing his susceptibility, and then he saw the first lantern. It was hanging from a low branch just off the trail, its silver flame burning cold and steady. He stopped and stared at it, his confusion deepening. What in the world? He whispered. He approached it cautiously, his hand outstretched. He wanted to touch it, to see if it was real, just as I had, but before his fingers could brush the glass, the whisper came again, this time from the lantern itself. It was my voice, but it wasn't. It was our voice, the voice of the place, David. It whispered, smooth as silk. You're tired, rest a while. He snatched his hand back as if burned, his eyes wide with a fear he couldn't rationalize. It was just a lantern, just a voice, but every instinct in his body was screaming at him to run. He backed away from the lantern, turning to continue down the trail, and that's when he saw me properly for the first time. Not as a tree, but as a shape, a man-shaped tree standing, eerily close to the path, with bark that looked like frayed wool and branches that ended in gnarled, finger-like twigs, and with a faint silver light emanating from its core. He froze, his mouth agape, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. The semblance of a human form made of wood and shadow was more terrifying to him than any outright monster. It was the uncanny valley of nature, the thing that was almost right and therefore completely wrong. No, he breathed. No, no, no. He turned to run, and there, standing in the middle of of the path behind him was the gaunt man blocking his retreat. He was just standing there as he had for me, patient, still, his pale eyes holding David's. The hunter and the prey, David let out a choked cry, a sound of pure, undiluted terror. He spun around, looking for an escape route. But the woods on either side of the trail were now a solid, tangled wall, thicker than any real undergrowth had a right to be. It was a cage, and he was in the center of it with the gaunt man behind him and me, the man-tree, in front of him. He was trapped. He sank to his knees, sobbing, his hands over his face. The gaunt man did not move. He just watched, allowing the despair to settle, to take root. This was part of the process. Breaking down of the will, the acceptance of the inevitable. I watched too. From my stationary post, a ringside seat to my own replacement, I felt a pull, a compulsion. And from my branches, a few dry brown leaves shook loose. They didn't fall randomly. They swirled on a non-existent breeze and settled on the trail in front of David. They trembled and arranged themselves, spelling out a message just as they had for me. The words formed. It's easier if you don't fight. David saw the words. His sobs hiccuping to a halt, he stared at the leaves, his mind breaking. This was beyond anything he could comprehend. The world had ceased to operate by any rules he knew. The gaunt man took a single, silent step forward, and David flinched, scrambling backwards on his hands and heels until his back hit a tree. The tree, my tree. He recoiled from the contact, from the feel of my bark, but it was too late. The moment he touched me, the process accelerated. I could feel his warmth, his life force, his terror. It flowed into me through the point of contact, a vibrant electric energy that was both horrifying and intensely pleasurable. It was feeding me, feeding the forest. The gaunt man nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. And then he spoke aloud, his voice the sound of a deep, frozen cave. Welcome, David. We have been waiting for you, and from the woods all around, the other forest people emerged, their stone eyes watching, their forms silent and solemn. They gathered around, not threateningly, but like mourners at a graveside or witnesses at a baptism. David looked from them to the gaunt man, to me, the tree he was leaning against, and in that moment he understood. He saw the faint, fading glimmer of what I had been in the grain, my bark in the shape of my trunk. He saw that his fate was to become like me, permanent part of the scenery. His eyes met mine, or where my eyes used to be, and in that final, shared moment of horror, I saw a spark of him, of David the human, a real estate agent from Burlington with a fear of heights and a love of classic rock. And then I felt his will break. It snapped like a dry twig, and his expression went slack, resigned. The forest people moved in, not to grab him, but to gently guide him. Their touch like cold moss on his skin, they led him off the trail towards a waiting grove of young birch trees. His steps were shuffling, mechanical. He was already halfway gone. The gaunt man watched them go, and then he turned his pale eyes to me. I felt a new thought impressed upon me, a command, remember, and with it, a flood of images. Not of victims, but of the forest's true face. I saw the heart of it, a deep, hidden gorge where a river of silver fire flowed over black rocks, and in the center of the river stood a being of pure shadow and light, the ancient, consciousness of this place, the source of the whispers. It was old, older than the continents. A sliver of a different world that had fused with this mountain long ago. It wasn't evil, it was simply hungry and lonely, and its method of reproduction was to absorb, to collect, to add sentient beings to its network, to make the forest itself a thinking, feeling entity. We were its neurons, its senses, and the good men were its hands. We were all part of it now. David was being taken to his planting spot, where he would sink his new roots into the Silver River's bank and begin his long watch, and my initiation complete, was now a fully integrated part of the system. My individual awareness began to blur at the edges, blending with the awareness of the trees around me. I could feel the slow thoughts of the pine next to me, the patient memory of the granite beneath us. Theodore was almost gone, a forgotten dream, and the watchful sentinel was all that remained. The silver sun reached its zenith, casting no shadows, only a flat, eternal light, and the forest settled into its satisfied, waiting silence. It had been fed, and it was content for now. The silence after the feeding is the deepest kind, a satisfied, sated quiet that hums through the roots and the rocks and the cold silver air. David is gone, planted somewhere in a birch grove near the hidden river, his red backpack now a faded scrap of color being slowly digested by the moss. His thoughts are already slowing, settling into the long, slow rhythm of the watch. His panic is a fading echo, a last few drops of rain after a storm. Soon he will be as I am, a calm, patient observer, a note in the forest's vast, silent mind. My own transformation is complete. The last shreds of Theodore have dissolved. The memory of a truck, of a city. For friends' laughter, it's all like a story I read in a book once. The details are blurry and unimportant. What is important is the trail, the feel of the gravel under my roots, the angle of the light, the approach of time, for time moves differently here, in stretches of centuries and moments of terror. I have stood through the turning of seasons I cannot feel. The silver sun does not waver. The cold does not change, but occasionally the forest allows a glimpse of the true world outside a window. Real sunlight will break through, or a flurry of real snow will dust my branches, just to make the illusion more perfect for the next one. I have learned the purpose of the watch. It is not just to lure, but to maintain the veil, to reinforce the illusion that this is just a forest, a beautiful, wild, but ultimately normal part of the White Mountains. We smooth over the cracks in reality. We nudge the thoughts of hikers who come too close to the truth, making them feel a sudden urge to turn back, or unexplained sense of peace that convinces them they've found what they were looking for and can now leave. We are the gatekeepers, ensuring that only the truly lonely, the truly lost, those whose energy resonates with the hunger of the heart of the forest, allowed to step through the veil and become part of us. Days pass, or years, I don't know. I feel the vibrations of many boots on the trail. Most pass by, their auras bright with chatter and companionship, untouched by our whispers, which to them sound only like the wind. But then I feel him, a new one. A solo hiker, a young man with a heavy heart. His name is Elijah. His thoughts are a storm of sadness and confusion. He is perfect, the forest, stirs around me. I feel the ancient consciousness shift its attention. The gunman materializes from behind a tree farther down the trail, taking his position, and I feel the command ripple through me. A compulsion that is now as natural as breathing. My branches tremble, and the silver light blooms within me, a cold, inviting glow. Elijah's walking slowly, his head down. He hasn't seen the gunman yet. He is lost in his own pain, which is a beacon shining into the darkness, calling us as he draws nearer. I feel the whisper build inside me, a dry rustle of leaves and longing. It pushes out from my core and it floats down the trail, a gentle sighing sound that carries his name, Elijah. He stops just as David did, just as I did. His head lifts, his eyes wide with a hope that is so tragic it almost stirs something dead within me. He thinks he has been called. He thinks he has been found. He takes a step forward and then another, his eyes searching for the source of the voice. They land on me, on my man-shaped trunk and my softly glowing branches. His mouth opens in confusion, but not yet fear. He sees the shape, but his mind, clouded by grief, tries to make it something else, a trick of the light, a strange rock formation. The gunman takes a silent step onto the trail behind him, and ritual begins again. I watch, I participate, I glow, I whisper. I am the lighthouse on a shore of bones, guiding another ship onto the rocks. I feel no pity. I feel no remorse. I am simply fulfilling my function. I am part of the forest, and the forest must eat. Elijah's will is weak. He breaks quickly, his sadness making him receptive, eager almost for the oblivion we offer. The forest people emerge and lead him away. His steps are already heavy, his form already beginning to stiffen. The gunman watches him go and then turns to me. I expect the usual feeling of satisfaction, but job well done. But this time something is different. The gunman's pale eyes are fixed on me with a new intensity. He walks towards me, his steps making no sound on the gravel. He stops right in front of me, so close I can see the intricate patterns in his bark-like skin, the deep grooves that are not quite wrinkles. He raises a hand, and for the first time he touches me of his own volition, not to adjust, but to communicate. His fingers, cold and dry as stone, press against my trunk, right where my heart used to be, and a flood of images, more intense and violent than any before, crashes into my awareness. I see the heart of the forest, the silver river, and the being of shadow and light at its center, but it is agitated, its form swirling violently. I see cracks appearing in the veil, flashes of the real sun, the real blue sky bleeding through. The forest is wounded. The balance is off. Too many have been taken too quickly, or the world outside is changing. Pushing back against the anomaly, the ancient consciousness is afraid. It needs to strengthen the veil, to deepen the illusion, and for that, it needs a new kind of sentinel, not a passive watchman, but an active hunter. Predator placed in the world of men, the gunman's meaning sears into me. The forest has chosen me. My transformation was different. My resistance was noted. The spark of who I was, though faded, is not entirely gone, and that spark is what is needed. The gunman's fingers press harder, and I feel a terrible, wrenching pain, a splintering crack that echoes through my core. My roots are tearing free from the nourishing, cold soil. My branches are pulling in, compacting. The bark is smoothing, reshaping. The silver light is being drawn back inside, compressed into a cold stone behind my eyes. Pain is immense, a rebirth in reverse. I am being unmade, pulled back from being a tree and forced into a new shape, the shape of a man, but not a man, a copy, a replica. I feel my legs separate, my arms pull free from my sides. The rough part becomes the rough texture of wool trousers, a jacket my twisted. Branches become fingers, my trunk becomes a torso. The silver light in my core becomes a pair of pale, milky eyes that snap open. I am standing on the trail, onto legs. I am tall, I am gaunt, I am cold. I look down at my hands. They are human hands, but they are not my hands. They are as hands. The hands of the gaunt man. I am wearing the same old-fashioned clothes. I feel the same ancient cold in my bones, the same patient hunger. The gaunt man who was my shepherd stands before me, and I see now that he is not one being, but a role, a suit worn by many over millennia, and now it is my turn. He, the previous one, nods slowly, and then he turns and walks into the trees, his form dissolving into the shadows, leaving me alone on the trail. I am the gaunt man now. I am the hunter. My first thought is not a word, but an impulse, a location. A trailhead parking lot far from here, in another state, another forest, where a woman is just stepping out of her car alone, her heart heavy, with a loss she cannot name. I know her name. It is Sarah, and the forest is hungry. I take a step. First step in this new body, and it makes no sound on the gravel. I am a ghost, a rumor, a warning whisper. I walk down the trail, not towards the heart of the forest, but towards the highway, towards the world. My work here is done. A new watchman will be chosen from the trees to take my place, and I have a new purpose. To walk the earth, to find the lonely ones, the broken ones, and to whisper to them of a beautiful, quiet place in the woods where they can find peace, and to lead them home, to lead them to us. I reach the Lincoln Woods parking lot. It is empty except for a single car. The silver sun overhead casts no shadow behind me. I do not need a vehicle. I will walk, and the roads will shorten for me. The distances will collapse. I pass the trailhead kiosk, and on it, nailed to the wood, is a faded photocopy with a picture of a man with a kind face. It is titled Missing, and below it, the name Theodore Warren, last seen October 23rd. I look at the picture, and the face is familiar the way a childhood memory is familiar. Distant and unreal. I feel nothing, no connection, no grief. That man is gone, he stopped. And now he is part of something so much larger. I turn away from the poster and step onto the pavement. The beginning of my long journey out into the world. To find Sarah, and after her countless others. The forest must eat, and